Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we are reviewing a couple different styles, but I picked beers that are lighter. Not necessarily in appearance, though they won't be dark like a stout, but certainly in ABV. Some kind of lower end, middle of the road beers, nothing heavy. That's kind of the common element here. Nonetheless, we're going to be starting today with Fremont Brewing's Pride. This is a Kölsch. 5.5% ABV. They are based out of Seattle, Washington. This beer was brewed in honor of Pride Month, and indeed a portion of proceeds from brewing this go to foundations that support the LGBTQ community. Nonetheless, that ought to be really good. I love a proper Kölsch. I'm curious to see how Fremont brews one up. Number two, we're moving on to Anchorage Brewing Company's The Return. This is a Saison. 4% ABV on this one. They are named after the city, so Anchorage, Alaska. And these were also aged in French oak for 2 months. So I imagine this is going to be really good. I've mentioned this in prior videos, but if you're not aware, if you don't live in Alaska near Anchorage to where you can get it local, the only other place you can get their beers is through Tavour. So this is indeed another Tavour review. I'm going to keep doing them because I've been just getting my hands on some absolutely fantastic beers I haven't seen anywhere down here in Tampa. So without further ado, we're going to get this kicked off, starting with the Fremont Brewing Pride, the Kölsch at 5.5% ABV. Okay, jumping into our first beer of today's review. This is Fremont Brewing Company's Pride. This is a Kölsch, 5.5% ABV. They are based out of Seattle, Washington. As I stated prior, this is brewed for Pride Month. They do it once a year, every year in Pride Month, brew a different beer. And some proceeds go to organizations that help support and fight for LGBTQ rights, which is obviously very important. There's enough hate in the world, folks. Absolutely wholly support this. Rather colorful can art considering it's just black. It's got kind of the de facto rainbow kind of theme going on. And I am no avian expert, but I believe that's an ibis on the can here. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you know more about birds than I. And it also has been kind of rainbow colored. It's a very cool looking can art. Gonna get this poured in the glass. And while I'm doing so, I hope if you weren't aware that you paid careful attention to the 3, 4, 5 times now that I've pronounced this word. It is not Kölsch, it is Kölsch. The word is German, and you'll notice that there are 2 dots over the O. That's an umlaut, which means that the vowel has a different sound. The closest English pronunciation I could get to get somebody to say it correctly is to think of it as It's not a hard like we do in the back of the mouth with a tight closed where the sound's made in the back of the throat. It's more in the front. It's cur. You have to lower your tongue and your palate when you're making the sound. So it's not Kölsch, it's Kölsch. It takes practice to pronounce German properly, but nonetheless, just a quick little German lesson for you. Let's get this poured into the glass. Oh, that is lovely looking. Now I expect this will be just a bit darker than the Saison, but perhaps not by much. This is a really nice, pale, beautiful, classic Kölsch color. Looks fantastic to me. It's going to be very effervescent, so I think that head's going to collapse pretty soon. Oh yeah, that is lovely. That's stunning. They look very similar to a Pils in appearance. Very effervescent. Typically get creamy heads as this one did. Very tight fine bubbles in here. They're very, very champagne-like in their quality. Super fine and just a beautifully clear, fantastic looking beer. Kölsches are one of my other beers that I clump into those perfect hot summer day category. They're just so light and refreshing. Now they do have more depth of flavor than many other offerings that I would consider summertime beers. The layers of the malt really tend to come through in a Kölsch quite prevalently, and it's one of the things I love about them. They're flavorful and they're refreshing all at the same time. As you can see, this head is already really starting to break down here. It's got a good mix of medium, fine, and tight bubbles, though that nice creamy pad is still floating on top and holding its own. It's got good retention, so let's give it a sniff. Okay, not a super duper pronounced aroma, but what I can smell is pure malt, which I kind of expected. It's not got an overwhelming hop aroma at all. Certainly these beers are hopped, but not heavily. Indeed, much more mild than your average Pilsner as well. So this ought to be a nice, malty, crisp, clean, refreshing beer is what I'm fully expecting. I've had many, many Kölsches in my life. The majority of them have been from German brewers. But I really love them. They're great, and I am recording this in the middle of summer, though it's going live near the end of November, early December, I would imagine, because I stay ahead on my content so I don't get behind for my viewers. But nonetheless, let's jump right in. Ah, there it is. There it is. That is indeed exactly what I expected. It's essentially entirely a malt experience. Are there hops in it? Yes. Are they hopped heavily? No, not at all. Just really light. It's typically going to be milder, low alpha acid, classic bittering hops that are going to impart an earthy hop profile to the beer. And it's in this, but I mean, it's among the lightest styles I could think of in terms of hop presence. The story of this beer style is all about the malt. And the malt comes through. And a reason that I paired a Kölsch with the Saison is they have strikingly similar malt profiles in terms of how the flavor develops in the beer. They both have that same quality that I like about Goses and Berliner Weisses. They have this kind of baked good quality about them. It's toast and crust and biscuit. And that's a very, very enjoyable malt flavor to me personally in a beer, particularly in a lighter, crisper beer that tends to be much more clean in its finish and how the flavor profile develops. And Kölsches are no different. This is a very, very well done Kölsch, for the record, albeit an American craft created, but this is fantastic. I'm going to jump in, body mouthfeel, explore the finish and how the flavors develop and end. You get the slight sweetness, honey-like, but not to the same extent as you get in an average Pils. That dissipates within the first 3 to 5 seconds, and then the malt really starts to bloom and just completely open up, and it gets progressively more intense and malty. And it's not sweet malty. It's more baked good malty, kind of paired with very subtle earth bitters. So you don't get any additional sweetness outside of that initial when you first get it in your mouth. And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger in intensity of the malt flavor profile. Once it hits its apex and it starts to diminish a little bit, that's when the hops that are in here really kind of come into their own and where you can really pinpoint, okay, that's some nice hop bitters that they went in here. And it's not overboard. It's very, very mild, but it's enough that you know they're in there. And the subtle, mild, low alpha acid, earthy flavor profile hop is classic for this style. You're not typically going to get a Kölsch that has a citrusy character to it, or a pine, or occasionally floral, but this is used earthy, very mild, classic bittering hop, and they did not ham fist with the hops in this. They're letting the malt be the star of the show, keeping the beer nice and light and clean and crisp and refreshing, and that's exactly what it is, and that's exactly what you want in a Kölsch. This is a very, very fine example indeed. Has a little bit of a dry finish, which I do kind of expect from a Kölsch. It's about the same intensity as you get, say, on your average Pilsner. It's that makes it feel clean. It's not dry like brute dry, but it's not super wet and sticky, so it just finishes cleanly. You know, you get the flavor and it blooms and it starts to go down and it just finishes nice and clean and gets out of the way. It's a very lovely beer. I'm going to take my time sipping on this and thoroughly enjoying it. And when we come back, we'll get to our second beer, Anchorage Brewing's The Return, which is a Saison, 4%, aged in French oak for 2 months. Okay, moving on to our second beer of today's review, we are moving on to the Anchorage Brewing Company's The Return. This is a Saison that clocks in at 4%. They are, of course, based out of Anchorage, Alaska. As is typical with Anchorage Brewing, they have very neat art on their labels. This one, no exception here. I'm trying to keep it at an angle to keep it from getting glare from the set lights here, but looks really cool. It's a wolf licking a tree or something. I have no idea. With maybe a flock of ravens in the background. Hard to tell, but nonetheless, let's get this one cracked. I haven't had a Saison in quite a while. I really enjoy this beer style. Ooh, this one's a bit effervescent. Gonna need a little sip off the top. All right, let's get this poured straight in the glass. It will not all fit in here. That's a fact. Okay. So, appearance-wise, this is textbook Saison. It's that classic, very light, very pale straw, kind of pale yellow color. Very, very effervescent, as Saisons tend to be. Interesting, though, is you can probably see here, this particular Saison created quite a creamy, foamy head. That's a bit atypical for the style. They don't typically generate as large or lush of a head as this. This looks rather akin to a Pilsner head, and indeed on the back of the appearance, just looking at it, one could confuse it for a Pilsner in a glass. But it looks lovely. Let's give this a sniff. It smells good. It's not a super pungent aroma. You really got to get down in there and take a good deep whiff, but you can absolutely smell a really nice malty back, and it doesn't smell dissimilar to, say, a Goza or a Berliner Weisse, or heck, even a Pilsner malt bill for that matter. It's got that light kind of toast, biscuit, crumb, kind of baked good quality about the aroma to the malts. It smells really nice, and this one does smell like it's got a little bit of a citrusy edge to it, maybe a little bit of a floral edge to it. This head is just so creamy and lush. I'm going to try to break it down just a bit. Just a bit. It's not a stout. I don't want to be digging through that to dive into this beer. So break that away just a bit. Yeah, it's so effervescent, and the bubbles are so fine. It's just going to want to form that head like crazy, which is not a bad thing. There are many beers I've had where I wish that were the case. But let's give it another sniff. On the heels of some agitation, yeah, that malt aroma really does come through nicely. It smells really, really good. I have a sense of what to expect when I jump into the beer, just from the aroma alone, but I expect I'm still going to have some pleasant surprises. I'm not sure, given how ridiculously effervescent this is. I mean, honestly, this is one of the most effervescent beers I've ever seen. It looks like somebody's got a forced carbonation system tapped into the bottom of the glass here that's just constantly carbonating it. It is going absolutely bonkers. That is some of the fastest, most aggressive carbonation I've ever seen come up in a beer. Let's jump right in. Give it a sip. Mm. 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 Okay. This is a very nice beer. It's got very much a classic Saison quality about it in terms of the malt. But in terms of the flavor profile, this one has an unexpected flavor that I did not anticipate, but is actually quite enjoyable. It puts me in mind of a Hefeweizen in that they're both light, they both have a similar flavored malt bill, and this actually has a clove taste to it. That is not typical for a Saison. but it is present in this beer, and it honestly, it throws me for a loop here a bit because I am put so much in mind of a Hefeweizen right now, even though I'm drinking a Saison. It's very interesting. It's very unique in the world of Saisons. I've had many. I've never had one that imparted a clove flavor. And it doesn't come through on the aroma either. So I don't know if maybe they brewed this with some cloves in the batch, or if perhaps they did use a little Hefe yeast in this. I honestly don't know. I'll have to do some research, but it's enjoyable. As Saisons are one of the beers that I would clump into the category of a great hot summer day beer, having one that imparts that clove flavor and has a similar flavor and profile to the malts as a Hefe, and a Hefe being a great hot summertime beer, you know, there's nothing I dislike about this. It's just interesting for Saison. The body is medium light, which at 4% on a Saison, I didn't expect, but it's actually got a little substance to it. The mouthfeel is not viscous. It's not really got any thickness to it at all. It's about the consistency of water. And it does finish with a rather dry sense in the mouth, kind of like a Brut Light, which is typical for a Saison. So it's got all the hallmarks of a Saison. It's just got this relatively intense clove-forward flavor that comes through in the profile, which is atypical. I'm not saying that's either good or bad. I actually rather enjoy it. It's interesting. It's interesting for the style. But I'm going to jump back in here and really see where the flavors develop in this finish. When you first get it in your mouth, get a little bit of that classic Saison tartness. That comes through quite strongly, quite forward, and that gets out of the way, and then the malt bill comes through, and then they start to commingle, and then this clove flavor starts coming up out of the back. And that just kind of splits straight down the middle of the malt and that kind of tart. Then the tart gets completely out of the way, and then you're sitting 50-50 clove and malt. And there's actually a decent bitterness to this beer as well. It's got a nice bitter edge, which I really appreciate. I don't know if there's some hop variety that could give that kind of earthy bitter that also somehow imparts that clove flavor. You know, there's so many new hops coming out. It's possible that there's one I don't know about yet. But this is very good. This is a very, very nice Saison. It's very interesting. Completely unique in the world of Saisons for my money, just because of that clove nature. That is not anything I've ever experienced in a Saison, and I really enjoy it. It's very, very well balanced between the malt bill and that classic tartness you get on the front, and how it finishes off. It's got that classic dry Saison finish, and yeah, this is a nice beer. I really like it. I haven't had any bad beers by Anchorage Brewing Company, and here we go. Here's another one that is just another fine example of what they set out to brew. I'm going to take my time, count my scores on this one, and when we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both of these beers, we're going to go through and get them ranked, starting with the Fremont Brewing's Pride. This is a Kölsch, 5.5% ABV. They are based out of Seattle, Washington. The aroma on this one was nice. It was certainly above average for a Kölsch, but not as pronounced as many of the top tier. I gave it a 7 for the aroma. For the taste, this was a really, really nice Kölsch. Honestly, I was really surprised how well this was done. It was nearly as good as the best German Kölsches I've had. I gave it a 9. Body, this was textbook. Gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, also textbook. It also gets a 10 out of 10. The finish on this was very nice. Kölsches, as a rule, they're not a super long finish, and they can kind of run the gamut and everywhere in between. really depending on how deeply roasted the malts are. Many of the German ones you'll get are much deeply roasted. Not that it's getting into porter or stout territory or anything like that, but they can have a much more amber quality about them, which does tend to add a bit more backbone to the beer. But the finish on this was certainly well above average, 8 out of 10. Head and retention, this was textbook Kölsch. This is another category they nailed it. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Appearance-wise, as I stated, Kölsch's can run the gamut, but this was textbook appearance. It's kind of one of those that they get a lot of leeway on the category. Can't dock it points though, perfect 10 out of 10. Balance. This was exceptionally well balanced for a Kölsch. You could get the really classic Kölsch malt bill that came through just beautifully, and it was super clean and very, very refreshing. But you also got that hop nature that they do have. It's not super intense. It's not even as intense as most Pilsners, but it's there, and it came through very well in this beer. I thought it was an excellent balance of malt and hop. I give it a perfect 10 out of 10. Feeling an intangible, I absolutely loved it. I really, thinking about my subjective, if there were just a couple little nitpicky elements that it had, been a little bit more closely aligned with the best German Kölsches I've ever had, I probably would have rated it the 10, but as it were, I gave it a 9. Finally, as an example of the style, I mimic my feeling in intangibles for the same reason. It was just shy across a couple marks to get the perfect 10. I gave it another 9. So that brings the total score on Fremont Brewing's Pride to a 92 out of 100. This is an excellent, excellent Kölsch indeed. They only brew these once a year, so if you didn't get your hands on it, you're not going to be able to find this one most likely for much longer. Moving on to our second beer. Anchorage Brewing Company's The Return. This is their Saison, 4% ABV out of Anchorage, Alaska. This was French oak aged for 2 months. The aroma on this. The aroma was nice. It was a little more pronounced than average, but not a super pungent aroma. I gave it a 6. The taste on this. The taste was excellent. Saisons are one of those categories you never really know what you're going to get. There are some typical common traits that they share. There will typically be a little bit of sour or tart. Often there's a bit of funk or barnyard or kind of gym kind of quality. You get in these weird, funky flavors and aromas. But they're not always. And the beer can have additives. This one tasted to me like perhaps they added some clove in when they were boiling. It was very nice. I've never had a Saison that had a clove flavor to it. And it was very, very good. It worked well with the style. I enjoyed it. I gave it a 9 out of 10. Body. This was a very nice body for a Saison. It was a little bit heavier than your average Saison. They tend to be quite light. This had a little bit more robust quality to it, which I personally like in a beer, but for the style, it wasn't dead on. So I still gave it well above average. I gave it an 8 out of 10. Mouthfeel. This was a textbook Saison mouthfeel. I mean, it nailed it. It was crisp, it was light, it had a nice dry finish to it. Kind of a light brute edge. It was perfect. I gave it a 10 for the mouthfeel. The finish also gets a 10 for the same reasons. But finish and mouthfeel can go in tandem, just as body and mouthfeel and finish and balance. Really all the categories can interplay upon one another, but the finish was textbook Saison. I absolutely loved it. Head and retention, this gets a perfect 10 out of 10. It was just such a creamy head that formed, and this was the textbook carbonation that you see in a Saison. It's a very, very, very effervescent style. Very carbonated, fast moving bubbles, tightly formed, and in general it's going to form a nice head. This formed among the best heads that I've ever seen on a Saison. It was indeed insane. It was as creamy as a Pilsner head and just didn't want to let up. 10 out of 10. Appearance wise, this was textbook Saison. That very pale yellow kind of straw color and slightly cloudy. It was textbook. 10 out of 10. Balance on this. This was balanced very nicely, though that clove that came through, I think kind of overshadowed the malts a little bit. Not aggressively, but enough that, okay, I would have balanced that a little differently personally. And I also would have liked, and it's hard, you know, it's one of those styles you kind of never really know what you're going to get. They're all a bit different, but I would have liked a little more of the kind of tart and sour edge that it started, but it was just there and then gone. But other than that, I thought it was very well balanced. I gave it an 8 out of 10. Failing any intangible, I really, really enjoyed this one. The clove was a really nice addition. I think it works well in this style. Again, I just would have liked a little more parity between balance of flavors. I gave it a 9. Finally, as an example of this style, for the same reason I gave it a 9. Just a little less clove, a little more malt, and if I could have gotten a little more tart intensity up front, that would have been probably the perfect Saison. 9 out of 10 as an example of the style that brings the total score on Anchorage Brewing's The Return to 89 out of 100. So again, two excellent, very high scoring beers, only 3 points apart, a 92 and an 89. Both of these, if you can get your hands on them, I absolutely recommend. They're well worth seeking. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's review. As always, I really do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. That'll keep our videos in your feed so you won't lose us. Like always, if you enjoyed the content and it helps others find our videos on YouTube, comment. Please do comment. Let me know your thoughts, opinions, feelings, suggestions, questions, ideas. You have a thought, I want to hear from you. Lastly, if you want to make sure you know when our videos go live to YouTube, you can just click the notification bell that is next to the subscribe button. Until next time, folks, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.